Ukraine has struck deep into Russian territory, and Moscow is feeling the pressure as the war grinds on in Donetsk. Kyiv's counteroffensive, now in its fifth month, is proving far more effective and daring. Ukraine's boldest move yet came inside Russia itself, where Kyiv launched a surprise offensive in the Kursk region, a strategic area just across the border. Ukrainian forces advanced in three coordinated waves, using company-sized assaults supported by armored vehicles, rapidly capturing settlements like Ruskoye Porknoy, Novosotnitsky, and Martinovka. Each town sits along the main road between Sudza and Kursk, meaning every capture not only disrupted Russian logistics, but also put Kyiv in striking distance of key supply lines. Geolocated footage shows Ukrainian troops moving with precision, seizing open fields and pushing into villages within days. Russian military bloggers were forced to admit that Ukraine's attacks were highly coordinated, taking ground that many thought secure. The scale of the operation surprised Moscow, forcing Russian reinforcements to rush toward the area under threat of heavy strikes. What made this offensive particularly effective was the element of surprise combined with smart strategy. Ukrainian forces didn't just rely on numbers. They carefully selected targets that would stretch Russian defenses thin, capturing settlements that allowed them to control key approaches. The operation also prevented Russian units in Kursk from redeploying to other critical fronts, including Donetsk, Sumy, Kharkiv, and Zaporizhia. Even more remarkable, Ukrainian forces carried out these advances under the watchful eyes of Russian electronic warfare units, effectively neutralizing many drones and traditional surveillance methods. That technological edge allowed Kyiv to punch far beyond what many analysts expected, achieving rapid gains with relatively minimal resistance. While Ukrainian forces advanced on the ground, their technological edge was making the offensive even more devastating. HIMARS rocket systems played a critical role, targeting Russian reinforcements before they could reach the front lines, effectively cutting off any support from Moscow's troops in Kursk. At the same time, Ukrainian electronic warfare units were wreaking havoc on Russian drones, literally grounding them and leaving Russian commanders in the dark. One Russian reporter admitted, "Our drones can't do anything about it yet, as enemy EW has nailed them literally to the ground." The impact wasn't limited to the battlefield. Explosions were reported at a Kursk aviation technical base, roughly 70 kilometers from the front, showing that Ukraine's strikes could reach deep behind enemy lines. Far to the north, Ukrainian drones hit energy infrastructure, including a terminal for gas condensate transshipment in the port of Ust-Luga, near Leningrad, triggering a massive fire. These attacks weren't just tactical. They were strategic, targeting the logistics and energy networks that keep Russian forces operational. Ukrainian troops combined these high-tech systems with traditional maneuvers, creating a multi-layered threat Moscow struggled to counter. By hitting Russian reinforcements and supply lines while advancing on multiple settlements, Ukraine forced Russian units to split their attention, making them vulnerable to further attacks. Analysts noted that these strikes demonstrate more effective combined arms tactics, where long-range fires, drones, and ground assaults work together seamlessly. The human and material cost for Russian forces in Kursk has been staggering. According to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, more than 38,000 Russian troops have been lost in the region alone, including roughly 15,000 irrecoverable casualties. These losses reflect not just the ferocity of Ukrainian attacks, but also the effectiveness of their combined arms strategy. Ground assaults, long-range strikes, and drone operations working in concert. Equipment losses have been just as severe. Ukrainian forces destroyed 104 tanks, 575 armored combat vehicles, over 1,000 other vehicles, and 330 artillery systems, further crippling Moscow's ability to mount counteroffensives. Russian units attempting to regroup faced relentless HIMARS strikes that targeted reinforcements and artillery positions, keeping the pressure on and preventing any quick recovery. Ukraine also reported capturing 860 Russian soldiers, who were later used in prisoner exchanges for Ukrainian POWs. These captures not only relieved pressure on Ukrainian forces, but also highlighted the operational chaos within Russian ranks, as entire units were encircled or overrun by coordinated attacks. Russian bloggers noted that the advancing Ukrainian troops often struck faster than Moscow could respond, leaving many soldiers with no choice but to surrender. Beyond the immediate battlefield, the psychological impact on Russian forces was significant. Losing towns, equipment, and personnel simultaneously shook morale, forced commanders to make hasty adjustments, and slowed Russian advances elsewhere, particularly in Donetsk and other contested regions. Every loss, every captured soldier, and every destroyed vehicle sent a clear signal. Ukrainian forces were not just defending. They were reshaping the war on their terms. While Ukrainian forces rack up gains, Russia is facing a growing equipment crisis that could shape the next phase of the war. With tens of thousands of troops lost and hundreds of tanks and armored vehicles destroyed, Moscow has been forced to pull Soviet-era tanks out of storage, refurbishing them for combat. But satellite imagery suggests a troubling reality. Many of these vehicles are in such poor condition that they're barely operational, leaving commanders with fewer reliable options on the front lines. Analysts warn that even though Russia can replace personnel, replacing sophisticated armor and artillery is far more difficult. Estimates indicate that less than half of Russia's tanks and armored fighting vehicles are fully functional, and their artillery systems are similarly depleted. The London-based International Institute for Strategic Studies predicted that, at the current rate, Russia might have only 2 to 3 years' worth of usable armor left, making every engagement increasingly costly. This shortage has tactical consequences on the battlefield. Russian troops are now conserving armored vehicles, relying more on infantry or improvised transport like buggies, golf carts, and civilian trucks for assaults. Ukrainian anti-tank systems and long-range strikes make sending tanks into battle extremely risky, forcing Moscow to rethink traditional assault strategies. Russian commanders have been forced to prioritize where to deploy their limited armor, which slows counteroffensives and reduces flexibility across multiple fronts. Meanwhile, Ukrainian forces continue to exploit these gaps, combining rapid ground assaults with HIMARS strikes, drones, and electronic warfare. By hitting Russian reinforcements before they even reach the front, Ukraine makes every tank loss count, gradually eroding Moscow's combat power. While the spotlight has been on Kursk, the fighting in Donetsk remains relentless, with Russian forces concentrating their efforts on the twin settlements of Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad. The intensity of the battles has surged, with reports of 41 combat clashes in a single day across the region. Russian troops are pressing hard, but Ukrainian defenders are holding their ground, leveraging both tactical positioning and advanced anti-tank systems to blunt the assaults. At the closest points, Russian forces are just 1.5 kilometers from Pokrovsk, where over 7,000 civilians continue to live and work amid the chaos. Ukrainian soldiers describe facing motorized rifle brigades and regiments, but they're noticing a shift in enemy tactics. Armored vehicles are increasingly absent from direct assaults. Instead, Russia relies on infantry, light vehicles, and even improvised transports like buggies and civilian trucks to maneuver across contested areas. This adaptation reflects both a shortage of operational armor and a cautious approach against Ukraine's precision weapons. Serhiy Okashev, a sergeant in the 25th Separate Airborne Brigade, noted that the intensity of fighting has changed. It's sharper, more focused. Ukrainian forces are taking advantage of this, using fortified positions and tactical ingenuity to inflict maximum losses while minimizing their own exposure. The situation highlights how technological and tactical innovations on the Ukrainian side are reshaping even long-standing battle lines. Meanwhile, the Russian focus on Donetsk has consequences beyond the immediate battlefield. With significant manpower and firepower committed here, Moscow struggles to respond effectively elsewhere, giving Ukraine strategic leverage in other contested regions. The battles in Donetsk aren't just about territory. They're testing the limits of Russian resources and morale, Ukraine's innovation on the battlefield goes far beyond traditional combat. The country has invested heavily in unmanned systems, drones, and long-range missiles, giving its forces an unprecedented reach and flexibility. One striking example occurred near Sevastopol, where Magura VC drones successfully shot down 2 Russian Mi-8 helicopters over the Black Sea. This wasn't a defensive maneuver. They deliberately set a trap for Russian aviation, demonstrating that Ukraine is not just responding to attacks but actively hunting enemy forces. These drones are part of a broader strategy. Ukrainian forces are expanding brigades with reinforced unmanned components and even creating a dedicated brigade for drone operations. In December alone, Ukrainian operators struck over 54,000 enemy targets, nearly half of them using kamikaze drones. The psychological and tactical impact is significant. Russian troops must constantly account for threats from above and below, limiting their freedom of movement and forcing them to commit resources to counter drone measures. Beyond drones, Ukraine is accelerating its long-range missile and cruise missile programs. Plans for this year include producing 3,000 cruise missiles and at least 30,000 long-range drones, all part of a $30 billion expansion in defense industrial capacity, a dramatic leap from just $7 billion in 2024. These weapons allow Ukraine to strike deep into Russian territory, targeting logistics, energy infrastructure, and supply lines while keeping Ukrainian soldiers out of immediate danger. The combination of high-tech unmanned systems and long-range strikes gives Kyiv both strategic and tactical advantages. Russian forces must spread thin to defend against multiple threats, while Ukrainian troops can focus on maneuvering and capturing key positions. Analysts suggest that this technological edge, with paired, while the battlefield evolves, diplomacy is moving in parallel, adding another layer of tension to the conflict. Reports suggest that the incoming U.S. administration under Donald Trump has expressed interest in ending the war this year, raising discussions about the potential deployment of multinational European peacekeepers in Ukraine. For Kyiv, any such move comes with a critical condition. It must advance Ukraine's path toward NATO membership, ensuring that foreign troops do not limit the country's long-term security or sovereignty. President Zelensky emphasized that European forces on Ukrainian soil would not block NATO ambitions. He highlighted France's role in raising the prospect of a multinational presence, framing it as a step toward broader integration with Western defense structures rather than a temporary patch. The Ukrainian leadership appears keen to balance the pressure for peace with strategic gains on the battlefield, ensuring that diplomatic overtures don't come at the cost of hard-won territory or military momentum. This geopolitical chess game occurs while Ukraine continues to consolidate its successes in Kursk and Donetsk, maintain technological superiority with drones and missiles, and push Russian forces to stretch thin across multiple fronts. The interplay between diplomacy and military strategy suggests that Kyiv is preparing for a scenario where negotiations could freeze the conflict along current battle lines, giving Ukraine time to strengthen its forces while maintaining leverage. At the same time, Moscow faces mounting pressure. Equipment shortages, high casualties, and stretched supply lines limit its options, meaning that any peace negotiations will occur from a position of relative weakness, despite ongoing offensives in Donetsk. Analysts speculate that this combination of battlefield pressure and diplomatic maneuvering cowl